everyone, and welcome back to the video. Today we're going to be talking about a unit that really completes a civilization, and that is the Cataphract for the Byzantines. Now, the Byzantines are just straight up one of the most well-balanced and well-thought-through civs in the entire game. They feel very fair, yet strong in their own right. They have a ton of options, and they feel useful in many different scenarios. That being said, they have some clear weaknesses that need to be addressed throughout each game, and they're not absolutely broken like some other civs that come out a bit later on in the game. Byzantines have been fair and balanced, yet strong for a very long time, pretty much 25 years. And one thing Byzantines are really known for is having these strong counter units that are also quite cheap and easy to go for, allowing you to spam them out and trade down your opponent until he runs out of resources. This is a generic and general game plan for the Byzantines, and while it's not always what they want to do, it's usually what they want to look for. They get their discount on camels, skirms, and pikes, and those three units will act as the counter units that Byzantines are likely to go for in their games. However, they've got yet another counter unit that I think makes the civilization complete, especially in the late game, and that is of course the Cataphract. Now, the Cataphract has a lot of things going for it, and overall I would say it's just a really well-rounded, solid unit that's good versus pretty much everything, or I should say decent versus pretty much everything. However, where it really shines is being a counter unit to anti-cavalry units. It sounds very weird, but Cataphract is an anti-cavalry unit. So anything that counters cavalry, the Cataphract will counter it. So for example, it takes less damage against Genoese crossbowmen, it takes less damage against camels, and it also takes less damage against halberdier, amongst a variety of other unique units. So the Cataphract will add mobility to the late game Byzantine army, but will also give them a nice counter to yet another class of units, which is some anti-cavalry. This is extremely useful because, well, of course, the camels for the Byzantine get a discount, and so likely your opponent will try to get his own camels or try to get onto some halberdiers, and the Cataphract can be a really smooth transition. Alternatively, the Cataphract can be a really strong power play for the Byzantines, giving them a really strong, well-rounded gold unit in the late game that is difficult to counter. Going halberdiers is like okay versus Cataphracts. You can like kind of trade down the gold, but in a straight up fight, the Cataphract will absolutely decimate the halberdier. It's not even close. And one thing I really like about the Cataphract is that it fits perfectly with the Byzantines late game. Think about it. Having skirms, halberdiers, and camels is really good as your, the main army, the bulk of the army. But besides that, Byzantines might have hand cannoneer and some bombard cannon, but they don't really have any power unit. Think about it. I mean, they've got Hussar, but you're missing bloodlines and blast furnace, so they're not too impressive. They've got paladin, but missing the same upgrades. So do you really want to invest that much into paladin and just get a watered down, washed version of the paladin compared to something like Franks or even Teutons? It's probably not going to be the best idea, especially considering how expensive the upgrades are for paladin and how long they take to research. I personally don't think Byzantine paladin has that much going for it. It could be decent in some scenarios, but it's probably just not the best unit to go for. So instead, having the Cataphract as a power play really feels nice in that late game. It basically gives a chance for your trash units to shine. Having the Cataphract in there, mixing in halbs and skirms, all of a sudden you have a counter to halberdiers, you got a counter to camels, you've got a counter to other heavy cavalry, so like your halbs can take those guys, and then your skirms can counter cav archers and arbalests and whatever else is thrown your way, and that army composition pretty much dies to not one unit. Like, it won't ever die to a single unit, and it will always trade well against a single unit. You have the right tools to deal with any unit, so your opponent is then forced to create some crazy composition to deal with your composition, and your units are cheaper, so it's easier for you to get to your composition and to spam out those units than it is for your opponent to deal with it. And that is something I really like about the Byzantine late game. The Byzantine late game without the Cataphract is honestly not as strong as people think it is. Like, halbs and skirms being cheaper is really nice, but if you think about it, the halbs are missing blast furnace, so you're missing some like raw power on the field if you're just rocking their trash unit. Again, their camels are also strong, they're solid, they're cheap, but they're missing bloodlines and they're missing blast furnace. So although they fight well and they're solid, they're cheap, whatever, you can mass them up, they also lack that raw power. And so the power in the late game for Byzantines only comes from the Cataphract. They don't have a single other unit that is a strong, well-rounded unit like the Cataphract, and this is why I think that unit in particular really shines in the late game and allows for everything else that the Byzantines can go for to shine as well. It really creates that perfect harmony, and And the Byzantine late game without Cataphract compared to with Cataphract, I feel like it's absolutely night and day. Another plus to the Cataphract for Byzantines is that it kind of adds mobility to the late game. Let's be honest, the only other option you can go for to get some mobility is Paladin and Hussar. The Camel is okay for mobility, but I think it's a bit more specific to a counter unit and not exactly a well-rounded mobile raiding unit. And I already talked about why Paladin and Hussar are simply not the best options, and so Cataphract is remaining the best option for some mobility for the Byzantine late game. Aside from that, you're just running skirms, halbs, maybe even champions or hand cannoneer around the map, maybe even arbalest, but nothing is too mobile out of all those units, and so Cataphract is usually what you look for. Cataphract can raid very effectively, can take fights very effectively, especially if they have the numbers advantage, because the Cataphract can run around, use their mobility, gain nice number advantages, and then decimate smaller army using their splash damage. It's a very effective strategy to take advantage in the late game. And before I mention yet another pro for the Cataphract, it's time to take a look at some of their cons. I mean, I'm talking up this unit and quite frankly, I'm making quite a case for them. I might go buy one myself, but the Cataphract does have some clear downsides. Number one, it's quite expensive to upgrade. This has been changed quite a bit in recent years. It's gotten a little bit cheaper to upgrade, but Logistica and Imperial Age giving the Cataphract's trample damage still costs 800 food and 600 gold. This is by no means a cheap technology, but keep in mind that trample damage is insane. The fact that you can deal 5 damage to any unit around you, ignoring armor when you hit a single unit in a fight, that is absolutely massive. Applying that effect to like 30 Cataphracts fighting at once, the damage is going to be off the charts. And so trample damage is really strong, and of course it comes at a bit of a premium. The Elite Cataphract upgrade is also quite expensive at 1200 food and 800 gold. So both of these upgrades together will actually cost you 2000 food and 1400 gold. Of course, you need all the other upgrades that come with a cavalry unit from the blacksmith and from the stable. But overall, I would say the Cataphract is expensive yet strong, and so the downside is of course the cost. If you can justify the cost for the upgrades, usually it's worth going for the unit. Another thing that's worth mentioning is that it costs 70 food and 75 gold a piece, and so going for it is going to cost you a lot long term. You can't just get the upgrades and expect to make them forever. It is a costly unit even after the initial investment into the upgrades. I will also mention you can't simply go for the Cataphract and Imperial Age without getting those upgrades. Like the trample damage is kind of what makes the Cataphract so good. It is a solid unit in its own right without the Imperial Age upgrade if you just get the elite, but the trample damage is kind of absolutely necessary for the unit to really shine. And so I would only go for the Cataphract if you can afford both upgrades and then afford to make it quite consistently, at least for a while. Remember, running out of gold for Byzantine is not necessarily a huge concern because their trash game is good. You just can't be playing trash units when your opponent has a full gold comp. You're gonna get rolled. And so using the Cataphract to wear down your opponent's gold and then letting your trash shine in a trash war, that feels like a much better strategy. One last thing I really want to talk about the Cataphract. I've talked about how it's really strong in the late game because of course it is a very strong, expensive late game unit. Let's just be honest, that's what the Cataphract is usually used for. But there's one particularly meta use for it in Castle Age, and that is to give yourself a chance versus Eagle Warrior Civs. Meso Civs are incredibly strong versus Byzantine. In fact, the reason why Byzantines don't shine on Arabia, in my opinion, is because the Mesocivs are just so strong in Arabia, in any land map, and so you're not going to really see Byzantine as your go-to pick. You're going to mainly see other civilizations that can either be Meso or be good against Meso. Byzantine are notoriously weak against Meso, but the Cataphract gives them a chance to at least survive until the later stages of the game, where the Cataphract can actually be a very powerful unit. Going for Cataphracts in Castle Age against Meso is a really good strategy. The only other unit you have to watch out for is the monk. So playing against Aztecs, if they're on like full pike eagle, you just drop a castle, go for Cataphracts. Watch out for their monks, but as long as you avoid those, your Cataphract will be basically unstoppable and insanely strong at scaling. It scales perfectly well because of course we've already talked about how strong of a late game unit it is. Once you get to Imperial Age and you survive the eagle spam in Castle Age versus Meso, then you can go hand cannoneer, you can go Cataphract if you still have some on the field. You've got a good amount of options to deal with infantry and eagles, so you don't have to worry about it too much. Similarly, against Goths, it gives you a nice counter to the Huskroll. Byzantine don't really have a nice counter to Huskroll besides the Cataphract, but then when you include the Cataphract, it's one of the strongest counters to Huskroll and Goths in general. And so Byzantines against Goths in late game, if the Byzantine player has fully upgraded Cataphract, it is an absolute nightmare for the Goths to deal with. They basically can't play infantry at all, and if they play full hab spam trying to like kind of wear down the Cataphract, you can easily mix in some skirms and conserve the precious Cataphract and only fight when necessary. As you can see, the Cataphract has been a unit around for 25 5 years, and it's gotten some small buffs over time, mainly making their upgrades cheaper, and I think that's made them a very nice unit for the Byzantines in general to go for in the late game. The Cataphract adds a lot to the Byzantine late game. It's already quite strong and diverse, especially when the gold runs out. Combining the Cataphract with some of the other strengths of Byzantines really makes for a nice, well-rounded civilization that always has something to play for. Overall, I think it's a unit that's often overlooked, and a lot of Byzantine players don't consider going for it, even though it is such a strong unit in late game. I know Byzantine cheap counter units can be, the main reason to play the Civ and why the civilization tends to shine, but I think the Cataphract actually complements those units very well, and I would consider trying to mix it in, especially when you have a lot of economy. It is worth going for that kind of a power unit in late game. It completely changes everything. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you guys agree with me on the Cataphract or not. Let me know your experience of playing with or against the Cataphract down below. I know my first time playing against it, I got absolutely decimated and I had no idea what happened to my halberdier. I thought they countered cavalry, but apparently I was wrong. Also, make sure to check me out on Twitch and Patreon if you want extra content and live streaming, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.